I am very excited now to introduce our speaker. And I am thrilled that Ginny was able to do this with us today. And many of you already know her or have met her or have heard her speak. She's a phenomenal person. Ginny was born and reared in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, which is very historic, obviously. Her dream was always to be a nurse, and she followed that when she graduated from high school. She went to Harrisburg Hospital School of Nursing and joined the Army nursing student nursing program. In her senior year of nursing school upon graduation, she took an intensive critical care coronary care course prior to entering active duty. She was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Army Nurses Corps, or Army Nurse Corps, I should say, while serving in Fort Sam Houston for basic training, Walter Reed Army Medical Center, and finally as a combat Army nurse in Viet Nam. At the 67th Evacuation Hospital in Qui Nhon, she served in the intensive care recovery area from November 70 to 71. She was there almost exactly the same time I was. She was promoted to first lieutenant during her year in Vietnam and awarded the Bronze Star for meritorious service. After completing her active duty service, she continued working in intensive care, open heart recovery, home health nursing, urology nursing, and a certified wound care RN to end her 43 years of nursing. And amazingly, she's only 37 years old. That's incredible. She's had the opportunity to tell her story to several high schools and long before Vietnam was in the history books, after speaking in a lot of different places, church groups, and so on. She's been married for 47 years to David Dornheggen, retired hospital administrator. They have 2 children, 3 grandchildren, and she lives barely in Georgia. Actually, she lives over in Lake Oconee area. And so I know you will be thrilled to hear from Ginny, and I'm going to switch over to Mark to manage her slides, if I can do that without messing up.
Yes, I'll take it from, I can go ahead and share them. Ginny, you're unmuted, so you're ready.
Okay. Thanks, John. Thanks, Mark, for helping me out today. And what a pleasure to see so many guys. This is very different for me. I'm used to speaking to people, and I can, look at your faces and see how you're responding. So I won't be able to do that today, but I do hope you enjoy this. To all my fellow Vietnam veterans, welcome home and thank you for your service. And to the AVVBA, which I would say, but I usually mess it up, I appreciate the opportunity to tell my story of memoirs of an Army nurse. Some of my speech will be a little redundant because of the CV that I sent to John, but just follow along with me if you would. Yes, I was born in the historic town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. When I was growing up, the grade school children were asked to walk in the Memorial Day parade and carry flowers from our gardens to place on the unknown soldiers' graves at the Gettysburg Cemetery. And on the picture on the left, I happened to be the student beside my teacher, and that was my first grade teacher. So you can see me there a little bit. And then when taps was played, we would walk among the low semicircular gray stones that I remember thinking how sad that so many of the stones had no names, just a small American flag where we were supposed to place our flower. There were rows and rows of these blank stones upon we walked. Little did I realize then that the same sadness would come back to me after my Vietnam experience. With the single exception of the Civil War, no military episode in American history produced a domestic trauma comparable to that created by the war in Vietnam. It undermined American self-esteem, envenomed American politics, and US social relations and prestige were damaged abroad. During this time, I was in nursing school fulfilling my lifetime dream of becoming a nurse. I would listen to the news about the riots and the unrest, but I would tune it out as I had my own conquests with my studies. In my junior year of school, I was listening to another student nurse talk about the Army Nurse Corps. I really became intrigued when she spoke of the travel, the money, and the educational benefits that one could receive. I really thought about this a great deal, as I didn't want to stay in Gettysburg all of my life, and I wanted to travel. And I really thought it would be cool to serve my country. This would only commit me to 2 years, and I would get $300 a month my senior year. Boy, that was a lot of money for me back then. I remember coming home and telling my dad and mom. Daddy was the most shocked, as he served in World War II and had 3 daughters and did not feel that any of us were going to have to go to war. Because I was under 21, I had to have an Army nurse recruiter come and talk with us at that time. She told my parents there would be a 95% chance that I would go to Viet Nam. I think youth has a way of having things go in one ear and out the other, because I thought that's not going to happen to me. But my parents respected my decision, and I was placed in the Army Student Nurse Program for my senior year of nursing school. After graduation, I continued studies with the 3-month intensive care coronary care course before I went for my 6 weeks basic training in Fort Sam, Houston. Now you can see me in my dress blues there. There's no way I can fit in those now, but that looks pretty cool for right now. But being in the Army Nurse Corps was really a great experience. My first assignment was at Walter Reed Army Medical Center. I was assigned to the surgical ICU and recovery room, as my MOS was a medical surgical nurse. Most of the nurses that I worked with volunteered for Viet Nam, but not me. I was really happy stateside. I was close to my home in Gettysburg, being down in Washington, D.C., and I loved Walter Reed. But as fate had it, I received my orders and was deployed November 21st, 1970. I had just turned 22 years old and only been out of nursing school for 1 year. I was nervous and apprehensive about my new assignment, but mostly concerned that I would not be able to handle the war experiences. As you can see in the picture on the left, that's the picture of Qui Nhon. It was in between the coastal mountains. On the right, which I know you can't see because of the photos, but the blue in the map shows where the hot areas were, and Qui Nhon was one of them, right in the middle of Tu Quoc. Even though we were on the South China Sea, we were in a dangerous area there. I was sent to the 67th Evacuation Hospital in Qui Nhon, 275 miles north of Saigon in Tu Quoc. As you can see in the picture here, the aerial picture shows the Red Crosses on the wards of the hospital, but the complex itself was rather cool. You'll see the WOQ, which is where the nurses were stationed, on your upper left, right next to looks like a rectangle together. That's where the WOQs were. The mess hall was the building, the building, I want to say elongated building, there beside the hospital. And you can see also the helicopter pads that are in the front of the picture, and the recovery room, the emergency room, or what we called R&E, was that white door that you can see there on the bottom right. You can also see we were in Evacuation Hospital, and so we had the helicopter pads for our soldiers, and then we had the large runway for our C-130s that would evacuate patients to other facilities such as Saigon or Japan. When we got our patients from the field, they were brought in by casualty emergency helicopters called dust-offs. And we'll go to the next slide. Oops, sorry. There you can see our hospital. It was a 2-story concrete hospital for the most part, but we did have our Quonset huts that we also worked in, which you'll see later. So, okay. So we got our patients from the field as they were brought in by the emergency helicopters called dust-offs. The medics in the field would do the emergency care, such as stabilizing airways, starting IVs, and control bleeding as much as possible. A call for the dust-offs gave the wounded soldiers a feeling the odds were in their favor as help would be coming soon. It is because of these guys, the medics and the dust-off helicopter crews, that we saved so many young men. The injured could be at the hospitals in less than 10 to 20 minutes if they weren't under fire. There was no front line in the Vietnam War. In the Vietnam War, the hospitals were even considered on the battlefield. I was a combat nurse. My duties, skills, and expectations were to maintain the highest standards of care during any kind of situation. Critical thinking skills were of the utmost importance. I learned to visually assess and listen so that I could react quickly to the needs of our soldiers. I had no computer, iPhone, Wi-Fi, or Google to help with any references to see what to do. I learned to do emergency procedures with the guidance of our dedicated doctors. Some of those included inserting chest tubes, emergency tracheotomies, suturing, inserting special tubing we called intercasts into major vessels for blood and rapid fluid infusions. We not only cared for our young 18 to 30-year-old soldiers, but Allied troops, Vietnamese soldiers, you know as ARVNs, Vietnamese civilians, and POWs, the VC and the MBAs. As nurses, we always treated our patients with the best of care and respect. However, we were partial to our American soldiers, as that is why we were there. Our soldiers were young, strong, and truly terrific to care for. Most of their injuries were life-changing and would need much more care in other rehab hospitals or in Japan or stateside. I don't remember any of the names of my patients. I truly am thinking that is how I prevented myself from becoming fragmented from the hard memories that war can cause. Okay. My first experience with any close encounters of war, other than hearing the M16s, seeing the tracers, flares, and witnessing the wounds, was on January 6, 1971, around 2 o'clock in the morning. The slide you were looking at is a before we got hit. This is the ICU. You can see that we had the lighting was normal. The beds are there. We had room for 50 patients in our ward. Usually we would have anywhere, from 10 to 30, but we had the capacity to do 50. In the center there, where there is a chair, that was our nursing station. And we do have some patients there, but this is not the scene the night that we got hit. So January 6th was an infamous day in my life. I remember walking to work thinking, well, I've been here for about 3 months and nothing major's really happened here. I think I can tolerate this. Wow, what an awakening. I never thought things like that again. The VC had exploded an ARVN ammunition depot about a mile away from our hospital on Vung Chu Mountain. It was actually, I think they called it Granite Mountain, but it was part of Vung Chu. It was reported over 5,000 tons of different types of ammunition exploded during a 10-hour period. Now you'll see the slide where the explosions were so powerful that all the doors in the windows were blown in toward our unit. And I will tell you that it was almost like a noise that I have never heard before in my life, as I'm sure many, many of you experienced. I thought I was going to die, but I had just transferred my last patient from the recovery room into ICU when the explosions hit. And I remember that feeling that we were being overrun, and all I wanted to do was hide under a metal desk. But the feeling was really short-lived, because when I had been back in recovery trying to clean up when this hit, and I heard the nurses screaming in the ICU. So I had to go grab my flak jacket and helmet, which obviously, excuse me, I'm on that bed there. You can see that I didn't even have time to put on. We picked our soldiers up, put them on cots, and shoved them under the beds, and took other mattresses and put them around their beds so that no flying debris or shrapnel would injure them. We always took care of our soldiers first, and then the other patients. As I said, we cared for the enemy. Oh, here I am suctioning a guy's tracheotomy. And my friend Joanne Dux was giving him an ambu, because anytime you suction someone, you have to give them oxygen back. So that's a suction machine on the floor. As I said, we always took care of our patients first, and then the other patients. We cared for the enemy as well. The only thing with the POWs is that the nurses had to take care of them. The medics could help us, but we had to be in charge of them. The prisoners were heavily guarded, as they were needed for interrogation later. We had an NVA that tripped a landmine and was in a body cast from his neck to his toes. It took 5 people usually to turn him, 2 nurses and 3 corpsmen. That night, the prisoner was in our unit, and he was the very last that we moved. One other nurse and I picked him up, put him on a cot, and shoved him under the bed, but we didn't have any more mattresses to put around him. The explosions lasted through the night, and when it was all over, the unit looked like a tornado had hit us, as you had seen before. As we assessed the patients and the damage, we realized that only 2 of us nurses lifted and moved that MVA patient, a prisoner. Wow, adrenaline is super powerful. Celebrities came to Vietnam to visit the troops. People like Bob Hope with his Christmas show, we really hoped for, but that wasn't going to happen. However, we did get a surprise visit from this beautiful woman, Phyllis George, Miss America 1971, and all of her entourage. This is a story that I'll never forget. It's very close to my heart. I had already worked 10 hours that day when she came through our unit. They were dressed so beautifully in civilian clothes, their makeup, their hairdos, and I was in my usual fatigues and combat boots. I remember just looking at them thinking how awesomely beautiful she and her court were. One of the soldiers that I was caring for had both arms amputated and could not sit up by himself. As I was helping to hold him up, Phyllis George came over and spoke to him for several minutes. As I laid him back down, I commented, "Wouldn't it be great if all of us nurses could look that good?" He gave me the biggest smile I have seen from him and said, "They don't hold a candle to what you mean to us and to what you are." I leaned down and kissed him on his forehead, and I told him I would never forget him. Here he was supporting me when I was to be caring for him. When I turned around, someone had taken this photo of me. We worked 12-hour days, 6 days a week. When there were mass casualties, we called mass cows. We worked 16 to 18-hour days and left to sleep and then back to work. During one of those mass cows, I was working in recovery. This is a Quonset hut that housed our recovery room. You can see the beds there, they were all portable. The nursing station is back on the far left. And I'm not sure that you can actually, I know where it is, but between the nurse's desk and the first bed, there is an opening that goes right into ICU on the left. So anytime we worked in recovery, we worked in ICU. Several soldiers were ambushed in the Anke Mountain Pass and required surgery. One of them was a newly married 19-year-old who had his right arm blown off at the shoulder. His left arm was amputated above his right elbow, above his, his left elbow. Both eyes were bandaged, but he has lost his left eye and his right eye was questionable. As he woke up from anesthesia, he became very restless and trying to place his arms down, so kept lifting his chest up, trying to put it down and yelling, "Nurse, I can't put my arms down." At this point, it was the wee hours of the morning when all of this was occurring, and the doctor had told me that I was not supposed to tell him anything about his condition. I sedated him for pain and hoped that it would also help his anxiety. But his anxiety continued and it increased the agitation. And we nurses felt that he needed to understand what was going on so we could calm him down. I explained his injuries, about his arms, about his left eye, and hopefully that his right eye was going to be good. His initial response was, "Great. Now I'll be selling pencils the rest of my life." I sat down beside him and placed my hand on his chest, and I told him there would be no time for him to do that, because someone as strong-minded as he and determined had better things to do with his life, his mind, and his heart. He was with us a little more than 14 days. Every day, one of us nurses would sit down and write a letter to his new wife that he dictated. In turn, when we did get mail, we read his letters to him. He was medevac to Japan for further treatment. He finally was sent back to the States for further surgeries and rehab. He wrote back to us to let us know he would be one of the first soldiers to receive the newest mechanical arm that was top of the line. His right eye he was able to see out of, and to especially thank us for all that we did. Actually, we were the ones to receive of his valor. He taught us how to be strong and deal with anger and pain and remain brave during life's most unexpected misfortunes. Children were also victims of war. No, new slide there. Oh, I'm sorry. This is after the mass cow for the recovery room. The doctor that is sitting back there is named Wayne Dickinson, and I had the opportunity to see him 2 years ago. He's unfortunately was just diagnosed with Alzheimer's, but he was one of the most magnificent surgeons I have ever worked with. He went back to Viet Nam 17 times to do surgeries. He became a plastic surgeon after this, and he did a lot of the surgeries for the children there. So, but this is what our unit looked like after a mass cow. You can see the nurses back on the far right. We were taking care of a Vietnamese guy that had been blown apart, and he had taken 23 units of blood at that time. It was a hard night. Children were also victims of war. In this photo, a child I cared for found a phosphorus flare, thinking it was a toy. These were used at night to check for enemy intruders. This flare, however, was a dud and came apart as he played with it, burning his little body with the white powder. Phosphorus continues to burn even after cleaned off with water and disrupts the electrolyte system of the body. This little guy arrested while I was caring for him. There was little we could do, even with CPR, because we had no dialysis to clean his blood, and his burns were greater than 80% of his body. On our days off, many of us would take turns going to MedCat missions. They stood for the Medic Civic Action Programs. This is at the leprosarium that was near our hospital, and it was run by the French nuns who had been there from a long time ago when the French had run Viet Nam. They cared for these banished people that had the leprosy. We would perform amputations of the extremities that were affected by this mutilating disease. In appreciation for our service, the nuns would give us a fabulous French cuisine meal and allow us to use their private beach area on the South China Sea, safe and away from all fighting. The last 4 months in country, I asked to be relieved of the ICU and the recovery duties as I was overwhelmed and stressed. I was given 1 month in the orthopedic ward that shared a makeshift drug ward. As you can see, the orthopedic ward on the left, the beds are so close together. If any of you were in the hospitals, you can understand that JCOR, which is Joint Commission, would have an absolute fit with this. But the woman I was taking care of had been hit by a mortar, and she had 71 pounds of counter traction on her, which meant that you can see the bags of sand at the head of the bed and some at the bottom of the bed. On the right is what we called the cage, which was not a very nice term, but it was where we would place the drug addicts that we could help at that point. They were, most of them were going through withdrawal, which was extremely traumatic for all of us. I was given, as I told you, the 1 month in orthopedic ward, and then the last 3 months of country, I was sent to R&E, or recover, excuse me, I keep saying that, emergency for the remaining time. Fortunately, there were no mass cows during my remaining time, and I was very blessed for that. Going home. Next, yes, my freedom bird. November 21st, 1971, a year to the day that I was deployed. When I got back to the world, I never thought I had any anxiety issues, as I hadn't fought in the field. At least that's what I felt. However, these feelings had been suppressed and came out by me reacting to a car backfiring. I found myself on the sidewalk. On the 4th of July, I found myself under the bed after a cherry bomb went off. And my recurring nightmare of being overrun were reminders of my past few months. However, I still felt okay. In 1982, the Viet Nam Veterans Memorial, best known as the Wall, was dedicated. My first encounter visiting the wall was traumatic. As I looked at the black and white wall, I realized how many did not make it home. For those of you that have not seen it, you cannot imagine how mere stone and engraving can have so much impact. The names start out so few and low to the ground. As you go deeper, the names go higher until you feel buried in the mountains of letters, names of all those who died. I felt overwhelmed with a feeling of failure. I knew we had the responsibility to do our best to return the soldiers to their families and their loved ones. But somehow, the truth was there in my face. Remember the sadness I spoke of as a child strewing the flowers on the soldiers' graves in Gettysburg? Well, here there were names and no graves. Knowing that I cared for so many young men that did not get home was a realization that hit me hard. Several years later, in November of 1993, the Women's Viet Nam Memorial was dedicated. As you can see here, this is the program that was given to us that day. And Diane Carlson Evans was a creator of all of this. Excuse me, she was the instigator, I should say, of all this. She made this happen for us. And Gloria, I can't remember what her, Glenna Goodman, was the artist that did the creation. So I had both of them sign my book when I was there. So the memorial somewhat looks over the wall as though we are still tending to the ones that lost their lives. I went to the dedication to help put closure to the feelings that I had carried for so many years. It was a very emotional week. Soldiers that had served in Vietnam came from all over the United States to say welcome home and thank you. I never thought I needed to hear someone say thank you for a job that I had done some 20 years before. But there they were, holding signs up with the nurses' names that took care of them, trying to find them, yelling their names, thank yous, loud cheering and applause. The emotion was more than I can even express today. I'd been married 20 years at that time, and I remember going home and told my husband, honey, I've been hugged and kissed more this week than in the 20 years we've been together. He laughed, fortunately. In November of 2016, I traveled to Washington, D.C. with my very dearest Army nurse friend that we keep in touch with a lot. We celebrated our 45 years of being back in the world. While at the wall, we were presented with our 50-year commemorative pin by a Gold Star wife. I tried to tell her that it's only been 45 years, but she explained it's to be presented to any veteran who served anywhere in the armed forces from November 1st, 1955 to May 15th, 1975. I want to thank all those who supported our soldiers during those troubled times. This drawing was made by my 8-year-old, well, she's now 11, my granddaughter, that she wanted to make sure on Veterans Day that I will never be forgotten. So the memories, the lasting memories, don't go away. I feel our nation is learning to honor those who serve and now support them with programs that were not readily available for us. My decision to join the Army Nurse Corps was the best career choice that I ever made. The 2 years were filled with life-changing experiences, growing and understanding of who I am. I am a Vietnam veteran, a souvenir of that war, a part of history that some try to remember and some try to forget. Each veteran has his or her own story. We as veterans ask people to remember our fallen veterans and comrades. It has been said that the nation which forgets its veterans will itself be forgotten. I'm proud of the privilege to have served my country and the young men and women that I got to know, and they will always hold a piece of my heart. But in closing, I just want to share something on a lighter note. I kept in my hooch, right at my head, a cartoon that Charles Schulz created. He's a creator of Peanuts, and it always made me smile. So here's Snoopy on top of his doghouse, and he's just unbearable with this war, and he's cursing that stupid war. The war is never going to end, and he's mad, and he just feels like he's going insane. So he says, maybe one of the nurses at the dispensary can help me. So he trots over to, and who is behind the psychiatric help desk but Lucy. Well, Snoopy has just gone bonkers because he's like, oh my gosh, this American girl's coming over here to help us. Isn't that so heartwarming to think that they would be so good? So Lucy's talking to him, but he's not listening. He's just thinking this girl is beautiful and she's falling for him. So before Lucy could say anything more, he plants a big kiss on her lips and turns around and walks away with a smile, thinking, all soldiers should kiss an Army nurse at least once in their lives. I wish it could have been that simple to help all of our Vietnam veterans with their problems. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this opportunity. Have a great day and be safe.
And okay, I just got unmuted. Jenny, I have nothing. I cannot respond to that. But I do want to invite our members to, if you have questions, there's a chat box should be below your picture, your screen, and you can enter chat questions for Jenny. I think she will be glad to answer those if you want to do that. I should have mentioned it before she talked in case you wanted to generate questions. So does everybody have a chance to do that? I want to give everybody a chance to do that. So thank you, Jenny. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Any questions? Nobody?
Like the TV series China Beach. That's a really good question. Okay, so MASH I loved, but that was before I'd gone to Vietnam, and of course it was about Korea anyways. China Beach, I was a little perturbed about because only one nurse did all of the work, and it took a team. And never ever in my 43 years of nursing did I ever find the teamwork comparable to that we had in Vietnam. Okay. There was another one I can't. Thank you. I want to just share one thing. My roommate in Walter Reed and in Vietnam wrote a book. It's called Round Eyes. Now, her very first time that she wrote it, she had my name in it. And so the publisher said, does Ginny know what you're writing? She goes, no. So she had to change my name to, what was it? Cindy. I was Cindy. So my husband calls me that sometimes. Anyways, but I helped her with her second publishing with pictures. So if you ever want to read something, it's not a very big book, but she wrote it for a PhD in nursing because she had a lot of post-traumatic stress. And so this was her way of getting through it. Let's see, Tony, I'm not sure what type camera will be installed. Oh, okay. The only other book I was going to recommend, if you want to find out more about, it's Women at War. And this one is by Elizabeth Norman. And she also wrote this for her PhD. It is a fabulous book, and I use it many, many times in my research for different things to say in my speeches.
So did you see the question, what happened to the 85th Evac hospital that was in Qui Nhon in 65, 66? You see that question?
Okay, my understanding that Qui Nhon became, or excuse me, the 67th Evac moved to, was it not Cu-Chi, but it was after I left. It was still the 67th Evac, and then it went to the 85th. Is that correct? Can somebody help me out with that? I was told that, but I don't remember all of the, whether that is the correct thing to say or not. So sorry. Let's see, love to talk. Thanks so much. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it.
Awesome.
Thank you. Well, I hope someday I can get to meet you all in person. I was very privileged to be able to give my talk to the Atlanta History Museum. And so the picture, the very first picture that you saw was me, but they used it, and I can tell you when I walked into the dedication of the, many of you were there because you were all so involved with that. But I walked in and my husband and I saw the men and everything, and all of a sudden I looked up in the ceiling and I went, oh my God, that's me. I was shocked. And Sue Verhoff, I know you're listening today, Sue, but anyways, it was quite a shock. I had no idea I could be that big in life. So anyways, thanks.
So is it true, I'll just ask you a question live, is it true that you only agreed to do this remotely because when in your talk you say that every soldier needs to kiss a nurse, you're afraid to come to our meeting? Is that true? Well,
especially with the COVID-19, that's for sure. But I enjoyed being your guinea pig for this. I hope it worked out well for everyone.
So was the hospital staffed by both Army and Navy? You mentioned
no, only Army. Only Army, yeah. And it was, I'm sure all of you know that the camaraderie that you feel when you're in the service is beyond more than probably any other time in your life.
All right, Houston, a message. I was at Pleiku Air Base. The 71st Evac was on our perimeter. I read a book, Home Before Morning.
Yes.
It was written by a nurse in the 71st. I got a great appreciation for the work the nurses and doctors did there. It's approximately a quarter of a mile from where I was. It's going too fast. But the experience I had was 180 degrees different. So you can see the other comments there. As of 58,314 names on the wall, 7 are nurses, 6 Army, 1 Air Force.
That's right. That's right.
So that's my book.
Vietnam nurse. Okay. And it's Lou Eisenbrandt. Okay. I will look for that. All righty. I will tell you that Linda Vander had been at the 67th Evac a little bit. When she came back, she suffered greatly from post-traumatic stress. And unfortunately, she did not, she's still not alive today, unfortunately.
Well, thank you again, Jenny.
You're welcome.
I can't express our appreciation enough. I do want to get your mailing address so we can send you a token of appreciation. It will not be in solid gold, but it'll be very nice.